My fiancé never raised his voice when he said it. That's what made it stick. We were in the kitchen, standing side by side, doing nothing important. I was rinsing a mug, he was scrolling through his phone. It was the kind of ordinary moment you forget 5 minutes later. Except I didn't, because that's when he said, "Can you stop asking questions about my family?" Not angry, not defensive, just firm, final. I looked at him, waiting for a smile or a laugh that would turn it into a joke. It didn't come. "I wasn't asking anything weird," I said carefully. "I just asked if your sister was coming to the engagement dinner." He put his phone down on the counter and exhaled like I'd exhausted him. "It's complicated. You don't need to dig into it." That phrase again. You don't need to. I nodded, because that's what I always did when he said things like that. Nodding moved us forward, but something in me stalled. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months, and somehow I knew more about his college roommate than I did about his own family. I knew surface facts, of course. Names, ages, where they lived generally. I'd seen old photos, birthdays, a few holidays, nothing recent. His parents were private people. His sister was busy. His extended family was drama-free, which somehow meant never discussed. Early on, I thought it was refreshing. No chaos, no shouting relatives, no uncomfortable gatherings, just quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I told myself I was projecting. Not every family looks like mine. My family was loud. Questions were normal, conversations overlapped. If someone didn't answer, you asked again. In his world, unanswered questions just disappeared. The first time I noticed it was a year into our relationship. We were filling out a form for a vacation rental, listing emergency contacts. I wrote my mom's name without thinking. Then I paused. "Who should I put for you?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second too long. "Just put mine," he said. "I'll handle it." "You can't be your own emergency contact," I laughed. He didn't laugh back. "Just put a friend," he said. "It doesn't matter." I let it go. At the time, it felt small. Then there was the wedding planning. My mom asked the obvious questions. How many from his side? Does his family have any traditions? Will his parents want a separate table? Each time I relayed the questions to him, and each time he answered vaguely. They're flexible. They don't care about that stuff. We'll keep it simple. When my mom asked to meet his parents before setting a date, he said, "They're not great with formal stuff. Let's wait." Wait for what? I didn't know. But again, I waited. The engagement dinner was supposed to be the easy part. Casual restaurant, just immediate family. When I asked who was coming from his side, he said, "Probably just my parents." "Probably?" I repeated. He shrugged. "They don't like committing early." That was when I asked about his sister, the question that ended the conversation. After he told me to stop asking questions, the kitchen felt smaller. "I'm not trying to dig," I said carefully. "I just want to know the people I'm marrying into." He leaned against the counter, crossed his arms. "You don't need to know everything," he said. "Some families work better when you don't poke around." Poke around, like I was doing something invasive. That night, I replayed the conversation in my head, not angrily, carefully. He hadn't said, "We'll talk about it later." He hadn't said, "It's sensitive." He'd said, "Stop asking." The next morning, I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. People have boundaries. People have histories. I wasn't entitled to every detail, but the feeling didn't go away. It sharpened. A week later, I ran into his mom by accident. Literally. We bumped into each other at a grocery store near his parents' house. I recognized her immediately from the photos. Same eyes, same reserved smile. "Oh," she said, surprised. "You're his fiancé?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "I've been hoping we'd meet properly." She glanced around, like she was checking who might be watching. "That would be nice, but things are a little busy right now." Busy. Another vague word. Before I could ask anything else, she excused herself and walked away. Cart half full. She didn't look rude. She looked nervous. That was the moment the unease settled in. Not fear, not suspicion, just the quiet sense that I was standing outside a door everyone else knew not to open. That evening, I told my fiancé about running into his mom. His reaction was instant. "You talked to her?" he asked. Just briefly. His jaw tightened. Then he relaxed it like he'd practiced doing that. "I wish you'd told me first." "Why?" He paused. "Because it complicates things." There it was again. Complications, boundaries, silence. That night, I went to bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the life we were planning. The house, the wedding, the future. All of it built on a foundation where certain questions were off limits. I told myself I would drop it. I really did. But the truth is, once someone tells you not to ask questions, curiosity stops being casual. It becomes necessary. And somewhere between the grocery store aisle and that quiet kitchen, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't being asked to respect a boundary. I was being trained not to look too closely. And I had a feeling that if I didn't ask one more question now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering why I didn't. I didn't ask the question right away. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't imagining things. So I did what I always did. I stayed normal. I talked about work, we discussed wedding colors, we argued lightly about whether we needed a bigger apartment. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, I was paying attention in a way I hadn't before. It started with small things. When his phone rang, he'd step into another room. Not always, but often enough to notice. When his family came up in conversation, he'd redirect quickly, change the subject, make a joke, ask me a question instead. It wasn't secretive in an obvious way. It was practiced. A few days after the kitchen conversation, we drove to his parents' town for the weekend. We weren't staying with him, not enough space, he'd said, but we were close enough to meet for lunch. I watched him the entire drive. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. His voice relaxed. If he was nervous, he hid it well. Lunch was at a quiet restaurant, neutral, safe. His parents arrived first. His mom smiled too quickly. His dad shook my hand and held on just a second longer than necessary. "Good to finally meet you properly," his dad said. Finally. The word echoed in my head. The conversation stayed shallow. Weather, traffic, work. No one mentioned the wedding until I did. "We're thinking early spring," I said casually. His mom's fork paused midair. "That's soon," he laughed. "We've had plenty of time." She didn't smile back. Then, halfway through the meal, something small happened. His dad asked, "Did you ever find those old documents?" The question was directed to my fiancé. It sounded normal, routine, except my fiancé froze. Not dramatically, just enough. "What documents?" I asked, smiling, trying to keep it light. His dad glanced at his mom. She cleared her throat. "Nothing important." My fiancé jumped in quickly. "Old paperwork. Not relevant anymore." "Not relevant." Another phrase added to the collection. The rest of lunch passed uneasily. When it was over, his parents hugged him tightly. His mom hugged me too, but she whispered something I didn't catch. I thought about asking her to repeat it. I didn't. On the drive back, the silence stretched. You okay? I asked. Yeah, he immediately said. Why? You seemed tense at lunch. He exhaled through his nose. My dad brings up old stuff sometimes. It's annoying. What kind of old stuff? He tightened his grip on the wheel. Can we not do this now? There it was again. Not now, not needed, not relevant. That night, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. The screen lit up just enough for me to see the sender's name. Not his mom, not his dad, his sister. I hadn't seen her name pop up before. The message preview was short. Did she know right? My stomach dropped. I looked away immediately. I didn't read anything else. I didn't touch the phone, but the damage was done, because now I knew something I hadn't before. They weren't just asking me not to ask questions. They were actively checking who knew what. When he came back into the room, towel around his waist, humming softly, I realized how surreal the moment was. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like nothing was wrong. I smiled back. The next day, I tried something subtle. I asked about his sister again, casually. Do you think she'll want to be involved in the wedding planning? He didn't look up from his coffee. She's not really into that stuff. Does she live nearby? Sort of. Where? He looked at me then, not angry, alert. Why are you asking so many questions? The question landed heavier than it should. I'm just trying to picture our life, our family. He nodded slowly. Trust me, he said. Some things are better left alone. That phrase followed me all day. Better left alone. Left alone by whom? For whose benefit? That evening, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I searched his family's last name online. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity. Social media, old articles, public records. At first, there was nothing unusual. Then I noticed something odd. There were gaps, years where no one seemed to exist online. No photos, no mentions, no milestones. It wasn't impossible, just unlikely. I closed my laptop and leaned back. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for consistency. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized something didn't line up. Not enough to accuse, not enough to confront, but enough to stop ignoring. Later that night, as we lay in bed, he turned to me and said softly, I hope you know I'd never lie to you. I looked at him. I know, I said. And in that moment, I meant it. Because whatever was going on, it didn't feel like a lie yet. It felt like a carefully maintained silence. But silence only works when everyone agrees to keep it. And I was no longer sure I did. Because one small message, one sentence not meant for me, had changed the rules. They weren't just asking me not to ask questions. They were afraid of the one I hadn't asked yet. I didn't plan to meet his sister. In fact, I told myself I wouldn't. After the message I'd seen on his phone, every instinct in me said to be careful, to wait, to not act impulsively. But life has a way of making decisions for you when things are already moving underneath. It happened the following weekend. I was at a small cafe near my office, waiting for a friend who was running late. I'd already ordered when someone said my name, slowly, like they weren't sure it was me. I looked up. She was standing a few feet away, holding a paper cup, studying my face. You're his fiancé, she said. It wasn't a question. I stood up automatically. Yes, you're his sister, right? She nodded. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, carefully. I didn't expect to run into you like this. Me neither, I said, which was true. We sat down together, not because we planned to, because it would have been stranger not to. She talked easily at first, about work, traffic, the weather, the normal things people say when they're avoiding the reason they're actually there. She didn't look like someone hiding a secret. She looked like someone managing one. You and my brother seem happy, she said finally. We are. At least, I think we are. She watched me closely. He cares about you, in his own way. The phrasing caught my attention. In his own way? She smiled again. He's always been protective. Protective. That word again. I decided to try something gentle. I was hoping to get to know you better, I said. You're going to be my family. Her cup paused halfway to her mouth. That depends, she said. On what? I didn't ask. I waited. She set the cup down slowly. Look, she said, lowering her voice. I don't want to say the wrong thing. My heart started to beat faster. Then maybe just say the honest thing, I replied. She laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. That's exactly what I'm trying not to do. We sat there in silence. Not awkward silence, weighted silence. The kind that feels like a test. Finally, she asked, has he talked to you about before? Before what? I asked. She shook her head. Never mind. No, I said gently. Please don't do that. She studied me again, like she was recalculating. You seem different from how I expected. How did you expect? She hesitated. More trusting, she admitted. That stung more than I expected. Why would you think that? She sighed. Because that's usually how this goes. This. Not relationships, not engagements. This. I felt my chest tighten. How what goes? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, I really shouldn't be talking about this. Then why are you? I asked quietly. Her eyes flit to the door, then back to me. Because you're already asking questions, she said, and that changes things. I thought about the message on his phone. She doesn't know, right? No one's been very clear with me about anything. Her expression softened. Yeah, she said. That sounds like him. She leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Did he tell you why he moved out so suddenly after college? I blinked. He said he wanted a fresh start. She nodded slowly. That's one way to put it. Another gap. Another rewritten moment. I'm not trying to ruin anything, she said quickly. I need to know what you think you're marrying into. I think, I said carefully, that I'm missing pieces. She nodded once. You are. My phone buzzed on the table. His name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. She noticed. Does he know we're talking? She asked. No. Her jaw tightened. Then you should probably go. That surprised me. You're telling me to leave? I'm telling you, she said, that once he realizes I've met you alone, things will get harder. For you? For everyone. I stood up slowly. Why? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, very quietly, because this family doesn't do well with unscripted conversations. As I walked out of the cafe, my mind raced. Not with
panic, with clarity. This wasn't about privacy. It wasn't about boundaries. It was about control, about keeping everyone on the same page, even if that page was incomplete. That night, when I got home, he was already there, sitting on the couch, waiting. "Where were you today?" he asked casually. "I took off my coat." "Out? With who?" I looked at him carefully. "Your sister." The room changed instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. He stood up slowly. "Why?" he asked. The question wasn't curiosity, it was alarm. I met his eyes. "Because you told me to stop asking questions, and I realized I needed to ask one more."
He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, hands at his sides, like he was deciding which version of himself to use. Finally, he said, "What did she tell you?" Not, "Why did you meet her?" Not, "How did you run into her?" Straight to damage control. "Why does it matter?" I asked. He exhaled sharply and sat back down, rubbing his palms together. "Because she doesn't understand things the way they actually are." "Then help me understand," I said. He looked up at me, really looked, and for the first time since I'd known him, his expression wasn't confident. It was calculating. "She's dramatic," he said. "She always has been. She overreads situations." "Then why did you tell me not to ask questions about your family?" I asked. He leaned back, crossed his arms. "Because every time someone does, it turns into something bigger than it needs to be." "That sounds like a pattern," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. There was a long pause. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "You're safe with me." Safe? The word landed wrong. Safe from what? "I'm not asking because I'm unsafe. I'm asking because I'm marrying you." "That's exactly why," he replied quickly. I waited. He didn't elaborate. I thought about the cafe, about his sister's face when she said unscripted conversations. "Did you move after college because of something that happened with your family?" I asked. His eyes flicked away. "Why would you ask that?" "Because your sister asked me if you'd told me," I said. He laughed once without humor. "She would." "Did something happen?" I asked again, this time more gently. He stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he said, "Things were misinterpreted." "Misinterpreted by whom?" I took a step closer. "Can you give me a timeline?" I asked, "just so I know what I'm missing." "That's not fair," he said. "To who?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That's when I realized something important. He wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to protect a version of the story that only worked if I stayed quiet. "You told me your parents were private, but privacy doesn't usually come with rules." He looked at me sharply. "What rules?" "Like not asking questions. Like not talking to your sister. Like never explaining anything fully." He stood up abruptly. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because I'm confused," I said. "And confusion doesn't go away on its own." He paced the room once, then stopped. "I don't want you talking to her again." The sentence hung in the air. Not a request, a boundary, or an order. "Why?" I asked. "Because she complicates things." "For who?" I pressed. "For us," he said immediately. But his eyes didn't meet mine. I thought about all the times I'd nodded before, all the moments I'd let things slide. "This doesn't feel like us," I said. "It is," he replied. "You just haven't seen this side yet." That scared me more than if he'd yelled. "I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to understand what I'm committing to." He softened then, just a little. "I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's not comforting," I said. He ran a hand through his hair. "My family has history," he said finally. "Things that got messy. Legal stuff. Personal stuff. Legal." The word echoed. "What kind of legal stuff?" I asked. He shook his head. "It's old. It's over." "Is it? Or is it just quiet?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Do you trust me?" The question felt backwards. "Trust works better with context," I said. The room went still. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere, a door slammed. Life going on. Our conversation suspended in a fragile moment. "I need to know one thing," I said. He looked at me wary. "Is there something about your family that could affect me after we're married?" He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second mattered. "Not if everyone behaves," he said. That was it. That was the crack. "Behaves how?" I asked. "By not reopening things. By not asking questions?" "Yes," he said. I felt a strange calm settle on me. Not relief. Decision. "I can't promise that," I said. His eyes widened slightly. "You can't?" "No," I said. "Because I don't think asking questions is the problem." He stared at me like he was seeing me differently. And maybe he was, because for the first time, I wasn't nodding. "I need time," I said. "To think?" "To see," I replied. That night, we slept in the same bed, but the space between us felt larger than the room. He faced the wall. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about timelines, about omissions, about what happens when love depends on silence. And somewhere in the dark, a thought settled in that I couldn't shake anymore. If this was how he handled questions now, what would happen once I was legally tied to the answers? I didn't rush into anything after that conversation. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't call my friends. I didn't confront him again. I waited, not because I was unsure, but because something told me the truth wouldn't come from him directly. It never does. The shift came from somewhere unexpected, a name I hadn't heard before. 3 days after our argument, I received a message on social media from a woman I didn't recognize. Her profile was private, photo blurred. The message was short. "Hi, this is going to sound strange, but I think we need to talk. It's about him." No emojis, no explanation, just that. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Who are you?" I typed. Her response came quickly. "I used to know him before you did." That wasn't unusual. What made my stomach tighten was the next line, and I knew his family well enough to recognize the patterns. Patterns. The same word I'd been circling for weeks. We agreed to meet in a public place. Late afternoon, neutral cafe, somewhere busy enough to feel safe. She arrived early. Mid-30s maybe. Calm posture. The kind of person who didn't seem interested in drama. "You look like you're expecting bad news," she said gently as I sat down. "I'm expecting clarity," I replied. She nodded. "That's worse sometimes." She told me her name and how she knew him. They'd worked together years ago. Same department, same building, different teams. "I met his family once," she said, "at a holiday event." My heart skipped. "What did you think of them?" I asked. She hesitated. "They were careful," she said. "Very coordinated." Coordinated. Another word that fit too well. I asked her why she'd reached out now. She folded her hands around her cup. "Because I saw your engagement announcement," she said, "and I recognized the look on your face." "What look?" "The one people have when they think they know what they're stepping into." She leaned forward slightly. "There was an incident," she said, "years ago, involving his family. It never went went public, but it wasn't nothing either. My throat felt dry. What kind of incident? She exhaled slowly. Financial. Legal. It was framed as a misunderstanding, but it involved signatures that shouldn't have been signed. My chest tightened. Signatures. That doesn't match what he told me, I said quietly. She nodded. It rarely does. She didn't give me documents. She didn't offer proof. Instead, she gave me something more unsettling. Consistency. Dates, moves, job changes. She listed them without checking notes, and they lined up perfectly with the gaps I'd noticed online. The missing years, the sudden relocation, the silence around certain timelines. Why tell me this now? I asked. She met my eyes. Because I watched someone else marry into that family without knowing, and it didn't end well. I went home numb. Not panicked, just heavy. He was already there, sitting at the dining table working on his laptop. You're quiet, I replied. That wasn't a lie. That night, after he fell asleep, I did something I hadn't done before. I opened the shared folder where we'd been collecting wedding documents, guest lists, budgets, timelines. I added a new file, just one. I titled it with a date, nothing else. The next morning, I asked him a question I already knew the answer to. When did you leave your last job before moving here? He answered smoothly. Around May. The woman had said March. I waited. Why? He asked. No reason, I said. That's when I realized something that scared me more than any secret. He wasn't lying impulsively. He was adjusting. Over the next few days, I asked small questions. Nothing accusatory, nothing direct. Each answer shifted slightly depending on context. Always close, never exact. The version of events he gave me wasn't false. It was flexible, and flexibility is dangerous when it comes to truth. One evening, I asked him something I hadn't planned to ask. If something from your past came up later, I said carefully, would it affect us legally? He looked up too fast. No. He paused. Why would it? I shrugged. I'm just thinking ahead. He studied me. Are you talking to someone? The question was sharp. Defensive. No, I said. Another half-truth. He relaxed slightly. Good, he said, because outside opinions complicate things. There was that word again. Complicate. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I was calculating. Marriage isn't just emotional. It's legal, financial, permanent. And suddenly, the silence around his family didn't feel like privacy. It felt like insulation. The next morning, I looked at my ring. Beautiful, perfect fit, and heavy in a way it hadn't been before. I wasn't choosing between trust and suspicion anymore. I was choosing between comfort and clarity. And the hardest part, I knew that if I asked one more question, the right one, everything would change. Not dramatically, not angrily, but permanently. Because once contradictions enter a story, you can't unsee them. I stopped pretending after that. Not dramatically, not angrily. I just stopped cushioning my questions. The wedding date was 3 months away. Invitations were drafted, the budget was deposited, and people had started saying, it's getting real now. And that was exactly the problem. I began doing things quietly, independently. I requested a copy of the marriage license requirements in our state. I read through financial disclosure obligations. I looked up how debts, lawsuits, and unresolved legal matters transfer after marriage. Not because I expected the worst, because I no longer trusted the gaps. One name kept appearing in public records, in archived mentions, in a document I almost scrolled past. It wasn't his, it was his father's. Repeated, consistently, always attached to the same kind of language. Settled, resolved privately, no admission of wrongdoing. I didn't show him what I found. I didn't need to. Instead, I asked him something simple. If something from your family's past resurfaced, I said one evening, would it affect me after we're married? He didn't answer right away. Then he smiled. That same controlled smile. No, he said. Why would it? Are you sure? I asked. Yes, too fast. A week later, I asked differently. Why does your family avoid official paperwork unless absolutely necessary? He laughed softly. You're reading too much into things. That was when I knew. Not because he denied it, because he dismissed it. The pressure started then. Subtle. He suggested we speed things up, finalize decisions, stop overthinking. He said, once we're married, this won't matter. That sentence stayed with me. Once we're married. I thought about his sister, about the woman from the cafe, about how everyone kept telling me the same thing in different words. Don't slow this down. One night, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. If I asked your parents directly about the past, I said carefully, what would they say? He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, why would you do that? Not what would they say? Not they'd tell you the truth. Why would you do that? That was the answer. I realized something then. This wasn't about one secret. It was about a system, a family that survived by controlling narratives, by limiting access, by deciding who needed to know what and when. Marriage wouldn't make me safer. It would make me quieter, legally quieter. The next morning, I told him I needed time. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just said, be careful who you listen to, as if clarity was contagious. That night, I took off my ring. Not forever, just temporarily. And I understood that there was one last question left. Not about his family, about him.